Masechet Hagigah Daf Chaf Bet, and today is going to be a lot longer than yesterday. And so we're focusing on the same machloket that we discussed between Rabbi Ila and Rava. This is regarding the first case in the Mishnah that listed 10 or 11 differences between Terumah and Kodashim, and this was about a vessel within a vessel, putting them in the mikveh together, which one may do for Terumah, but not if one is going to use those vessels for Kodashim. And then we asked why. Why can't you put a vessel inside a vessel? Rabbi Ila is assuming that is worried that the middle inside vessel is going to be very heavy and it's going to press against the bottom one and cause a watertight seal, and the water will not get into all of the area where the two are touching. And Rava says, no, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried rather about a vessel with a narrow opening. If it's smaller than 2 finger breadths, then the water does not go in, and it's not considered part of the mikveh, and therefore the vessels in the inside are not going to be purified. So he says no vessels inside vessels for Kodashim, lest one not know this law and may put something inside, like needles inside a straw. All right, now we're going to ask, what's a practical case? That will be a difference between them. It's an easy answer. And then we're going to see a leniency regarding the narrow vessels where this law stringency does not apply. We're going to see that these two opinions are actually parallel to a Tannaitic dispute. The longest part is going to be a challenge of why distinguish Terumah from Kodesh. If you're worried about either of these problems for Kodesh, then you should worry about them for Terumah also. And we'll see that answer. And then finally, we're going to get to the second case back in the Mishnah, which was if something can be tameh only on the inside or the outside parts of a vessel. All right, so begin at the top. What would be a practical difference between their two opinions? Ika benaihu sal vegargutni shemile'an kelim vehitbilan. If one had a basket or a wicker bin, or a bin that might be used as a sieve or strainer, and you put small vessels in it and immerse them all together. למד משום גזרה שמייטבין מחטין וסינוריות בכלי שאין בפיו כשפופרת הנוד סל וגרגותני שאין בפיהם כשפופרת הנוד לכה. So the difference would be regarding this case, because according to the opinion that says we're worried that you might have perform a chatzitza, well, that could be a problem over here also. You might have a wicker basket, but maybe you'll put something heavy in the wicker basket that will press against the bottom, and then there will be a chatzitza. So that would apply. That reason would apply. However, Rava's reason that you might dip needles inside a small vessel, well, there is no such thing as a wicker basket or strainer that has a small opening, because this is how they work, right? There's no point in making a wicker basket or strainer. A strainer, the whole point is you put a lot of stuff in and it strains it out. And so since there is no such thing as a wicker basket that has a small opening, we do not have to worry that if you allow this, it may come to something else. And so that would be an example of where Rabbi Ila would be stringent and Rava would be lenient. Good. Rava l'tamed amar Rava sal vegargutni shemile'an kelim v'hitbilan tehorin. And in fact, we find another statement of Rava that coincides with this conclusion that we just said, because he says a basket or wicker bin that you're filled with small vessels and you put them, immerse them all together, is totally fine. And this would be even for sacrificial foods, because there's no difference for sacrificial foods or terumah in such a case. Rava is not worried about the effect of gravity. Okay. Once we quote Rava happened to say something else on a related topic that doesn't affect us directly, but it still is interesting. If you have a mikveh and you separate the mikveh into 2 parts with a wicker basket, so that, right down the middle, and on either side, you don't have 40 amot, 40 se'ah of water. And so if you dip something in either part, it's no good. because even though the earth is porous, and so because the earth is porous and it goes all the way down, it doesn't help. So the point is like this: although earth is porous, and eventually, that water will, if you leave it long enough, will trickle down, and there's water and aquifer is underneath. We do not say that the water in the aquifer underneath is somehow connected through the porous ground to the mikveh, right? We don't say that. Rather, it has to be directly connected with at least 2 finger breadths. And so just like we would not count underground water for the mikveh, so too, when you have a mikveh, then you put a wicker separation in between, and the wicker separation has only small holes, but no big holes, though that counts as a complete separation between the 2 sides of the mikveh, and that causes it to, if it had 40, it did have 40 altogether, but you split it into 2 and neither have 40, then it's not a good mikveh. All right, that was just a side point that Rava happened to say about wicker. He's lenient in one the first case, but stringent in the second case. Okay, and now we get to the limitation. When we say that small vessels like needles cannot be put inside a bigger vessel that has a narrow opening, like needles in a straw, when is that a problem? Only if the straw that I put them in was tahor to begin with, and I'm only using it as a holder for the needles. Migo de salka tevila lekule gufa de mana salka lename kelekelim de itbed. This is very interesting logic, because if the straw that outside I'm using to hold it is tameh, and then it requires tevila, so I could dip a straw, right? I don't have to cut it open, and so if I dip it, since I need it to be dipped, and when I dip it, the water enters and purifies both the outside and the inside. Or in such a case, when the needles are inside, they are purified. So interestingly, it's actually better for the straw to be tameh. If the straw is tahor, then it does not have any change in its status. And in that case, we're just seeing it as a vessel, as a holder. And in that case, the water is around the outside, but is not considered to enter into it because the water inside is not connected. But if it actually has to change status from tameh to tahor, well, the inside also becomes tahor. So therefore, anything inside also becomes tahor, including the needles. We have a proof that this is for this statement. Ditznan kelim shemilaan kelim vehitbilan hare elu tehorin. If you put vessels inside another and you immerse them all, that's okay. V'im lo taval. This line of the Mishnah is difficult to parse, but the Gemara in a second is going to explain it. It says, and if you didn't dip it, well, wait a second. If you didn't dip it at all, then what of course, it's not going to be no, it's not going to be good. So what you mean is that if the outside vessel that has a small opening does not need to be dipped because it's already tahor, and another case, umay me'odavin, and water that in 2 different pits that needs to be joined, they are not joined unless there is a hole that in the bigger vessel or a hole between the 2 sections of the mikveh, or the 2 pits that will be as big as the opening of a tube of a wineskin, 2 finger breadths. And so you see from this Mishnah that in fact there is a difference between a tameh and tahor vessel. If the vessel, the bigger vessel with a small opening, is tameh and it needs to go in the mikveh itself, then everything inside, because the inside of that vessel turns from tameh to tahor, anything inside the vessel also gets tahor. But if the vessel outside, bigger vessel, was already tahor, then it affects no change inside, and it's a small opening, so the water inside is not connected, and therefore the needles in there would not be purified. Okay, so that's so far we saw the differences and the leniency regarding the narrow vessels, and now we're going to see that there's a parallel to a Tannaitic dispute. You have this basket or wicker bin, and you filled it with smaller vessels and immersed all of them together. Ben la Kodesh, ben la Terumah tehorin. It's okay for Kodesh or Terumah. So you see, this is exactly the statement of Rava, because Rava said, I'm only worried about something with a small opening, but there is no such thing as a basket with a small opening. And therefore, he would not make this rabbinic gezerah even for Kodesh. So it's all good. Abba Shaul Omer la Terumah avala la Kodesh. The Tana Abba Shaul says it's okay to use the wicker basket and put small things in it for Terumah, but not for Kodesh. Well, that's exactly the law in our Mishnah. And so you see the Rabbi Ila is applying the different distinction in our Mishnah between Terumah and Kodesh, which is more stringent, even in this case of wicker basket. So you see, it's not because it's a small opening, but rather because you may come to put heavy things in the wicker basket, and then it would press against the wicker and the water would not get in between. All right, so now we saw that, and now we're going to get to the long discussion. If, so let's just see that what we're going to expect. Right, our question here is, Rabbi Ila and Rava, you both are worried about actually things that could happen very easily. If you allow one thing inside another, then people will come and dip one thing inside another in cases where it will really lead to a problem, either of these problems. So if so, we understand why Kodesh would not be allowed, but why do you allow it in the case of Terumah? Terumah is also pretty serious, and so it should not be allowed at all. Okay, we're going to end up discovering that, responding that Haberim actually don't accept Terumah from an Am Haaretz at all. So when we say that this is okay for Terumah, that means it's okay for an Am Haaretz to do for himself. But since Haberim never, let me explain this word, Haberim is part of a group. This is a group of people that were very pious, and they would take upon themselves with swear that they uphold a very high level of stringency regarding food, kashrut, terumah, maaser, purity, and so they know the laws and they do them, and therefore they can eat with each other. As opposed to Am Haaretz. Am Haaretz is not a bad person, although there are some really negative statements about Am Haaretz, but Am Haaretz is a person who follows the regular understanding of the law, what's commonly known, but doesn't really know all the details. He's someone who wants to do the right thing and generally does the right thing, but only knows kind of the surface and is not careful in the particulars. And therefore, it's not that they're totally bad or not observant, but they cannot be trusted, certainly not to the level of a chaver. So in general, a chaver will never accept the terumah from an Am Haaretz because he doesn't know what the Am Haaretz does with it, and terumah has to be tahor in order for it to be eaten. And so that's going to be the main response. We're going to wonder then, how come Kodashim is, but they don't accept Kodashim either. No, Haberim do have to accept Kodashim, sacrificial food from Am Haaretz, because otherwise that'll cause hatred. And we're going to see this very interesting law, like, when can you compromise a detail of a stringency if it will cause someone to hate someone else? And so that'll be actually quite interesting. And then we're going to ask, why should we prohibit terumah? We should prohibit terumah because he still might borrow the vessels. And we'll see that, yes, indeed, even Haberim borrow vessels from Am Haaretz, even though they won't take food from them, they do borrow vessels. And then we're going to see that it's going to get into corpse impurity, which is a much more intricate method, procedure to become pure, not just dipping in a mikveh. It has to be the vessels and the people have to be sprinkled with para aduma on the 3rd and 7th day. Okay, so let's hopefully this will become clear, and let's see what the answer is. Terumah also, how come you're not worried about either the gravity or the small hole regarding terumah? And we answer, leman kamrinan chaverim medayad. Who are you giving these laws to anyway? You're teaching them to Haberim, right? Am Haaretz, they're not reading this Mishnah. They're not, even if you tell them, they're not going to distinguish between the big hole and small hole and all this. They can't handle all these details. So we're talking about Haberim. And therefore, Haberim will know, not regarding Terumah, they'll know, oh, this is, when it comes to terumah, they'll know, and they'll say, oh, I'm going to make sure not to immerse a vessel inside a vessel if it's going to be a problem of a small opening and so on. Okay, so that's why we're talking about the Haberim. That's why we can trust them regarding Terumah. Now, obvious question, if you're talking about Haberim and they know the law and they're careful, so then we should permit a person to dip a vessel inside a vessel for Kodesh also, because Haberim will not come to dip a heavy vessel inside or dip something inside a vessel that has a small opening, because they're Haberim. So we should permit not only Terumah but also Kodesh. Oh, the problem there is that, and even if the chaver is doing it and doing it properly, the Am Haaretz will see him dipping one vessel inside another, and then the Am Haaretz will go do it, and he won't know that it's only can be done in a good way, but not an improper way. The Am Haaretz will end up putting a heavy vessel inside, and not realize that the chaver was careful not to do that. So we have to worry about the kind of mistakes that mimetic mistakes that others Am Haaretz will make. All right, fine. But then in that case, if you allow the chaver to dip a vessel inside a vessel for terumah, you're going to have the same problem. The Am Haaretz will see him doing that and say, oh, you're allowed to dip any vessel inside a vessel, and won't know that you can't do it if it's heavy. And so we answer, we don't care if the Am Haaretz puts a vessel inside a vessel for terumah, because although he may come to do it in error, and that will cause that terumah to be tameh, we don't care about that, because we never accept terumah food from an Am Haaretz anyway. Haberim don't accept their food, and so they're not going to be able to distinguish one from the other no matter what. And we're protected, right? So Am Haaretz will have their level, and we will have our level, and so that's fine. Or now we ask Kodesh, but in that case, so why don't we say Kodesh, since Am Haaretz are not proficient and they're not careful, we should never accept Kodesh food from them either. If you're going to accept Terumah food, all the more so Kodesh food, which has more stringencies, we should never accept it from them. And the answer is Haviale Eva. No, they'll not come to hate us. They're going to come and they're going to, here, come and we want to offer this, and we want you to join us and eat this, or we're going to offer something in the Bet HaMikdash, and you're not going to join them. They're going to get all angry. Wow, you think you're better than we are? They probably do think they're better than, right? They're like literally they holier than thou. But it still will cause hatred by the Am Haaretz, and since it's so just the stringency, so we accept their food of Kodesh. Okay, now we wonder, if Am Haaretz offers a chaver who's a kohen terumah, and he says, I don't accept this from you, right? You're not careful with tumah. Then also that will cause hatred. And so why don't you worry the same thing? And the answer is, the Am Haaretz doesn't care if a certain kohen who's a chaver doesn't accept his food. He'll find another kohen who is not a chaver, right? Even kohanim, just because they're kohanim doesn't mean that they are necessarily so meticulous. There were kohanim chaverim and kohanim Am Haaretz. So we'll go find another friend who's a kohen and is Am Haaretz, and he will accept the food. And so he has someone to give the food to. In any case, but if he's coming to the Bet HaMikdash, right, and he wants to offer something that is Kodesh, and so he can't just go anywhere else, that's why we have to be more lenient regarding Kodesh, to accept Kodesh from Am Haaretz, even though he's not so careful with the details, and so that is the final distinction between Terumah and Kodesh. So in other words, regarding Terumah, the Mishnah says you're allowed to put a vessel inside a vessel, because that law is directed to Haberim, and Haberim are going to be careful. And Am Haaretz, they'll put a vessel inside a vessel and they'll make mistakes, but it doesn't matter because we don't accept the food from them. Whereas with Kodesh, in Kodesh, Haberim do accept the food from an Am Haaretz. Therefore, we have to make a rule for everyone that do not put a vessel inside a vessel, because then people Am Haaretz specifically will come to make a mistake, and we do accept the food from them. So we can't allow them to make a mistake in that case. So we make a blanket rule. No one can put a vessel inside a vessel, not Haberim who know how to do it, because if they do it, Am Haaretz will see and they'll do it too. And not Am Haaretz for sure, because we're going to eat their food and they're going to come to make a mistake. And so therefore, these are two different things, right? So it's kind of ironic. Terumah, which is a lower level, but we don't accept their food, so we can be lenient. Whereas Kodesh, which has to be on a higher level, even though it's higher level, we accept the food because of hatred, and that's why we have to apply a stringency to everyone. All right, so very interesting. Now regarding this eva, a little bit more on it. Man tana dechayish le'eva. Who is the tana who is always worried about not causing hatred between one person or one group and another? Rabbi Yosei Detanya Amar Rabbi Yosei Mipnei Ma Hakol Ne'emanim Al Taharat Yain V'Shemen Kol Yemot HaShana. Rabbi Yosei asked, how come everyone is trustworthy regarding wine and oil? When the person brings a korban, see, the live animal can't become tameh, so you don't have to worry about that because it's alive. But you should worry about the wine and the oil that they bring as part of the libations, along with the animal or a mincha offering that they're bringing. And they bring it to the Bet HaMikdash. We're taking this wine and oil and bring it to the Bet HaMikdash and offering it. And how come we're not worried that the people, they're bringing this, but maybe, even though they say that they kept it tahor, but they're Am Haaretz, how can we accept it all year long? And the answer is, because what are we going to do? Can you imagine if the Bet HaMikdash would say we only accept libations, korbanot, offerings from Haberim? Well, most people are not Haberim. Most people are the people of the land, the Am Haaretz. So we say, so we can't accept it from you because we don't trust your level of tahara. Right? Even though they're observant people, but they don't know all the details. Imagine if we didn't accept it from them, they would say, well, but we want to offer something. If you don't allow it, then we'll go build another Bet HaMikdash down the block. And they'll make another mizbeach down the block, and they'll make their own parah adumah and purify themselves in that way. And this will cause huge problems. First of all, you can't offer anything except in the one Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem. You can't make a rival, and also they're going to do things all wrong. So because we don't want it to cause a complete split in the nation, therefore we have to be more lenient and accept the wine and the oil from Am Haaretz. And you see the power of avoiding hatred is so great that we will even come to do certain leniencies. Okay, this comes up a lot today. If you eat at someone's house, obviously if they're serving you pig, then you're not going to eat it. There's nothing to compromise about. But if there are certain stringencies that you do in your house, and that's great. If you want in your house, you can be stringent all you want, but you go somewhere else, and if it's actually kosher, they don't keep a certain stringency that you like to keep, well then, you see from here, at least according to the Rabbi Yosei, that the value of not causing hatred, if you would say, I can't eat at your house, and then they would come to denigrate and hate you or whatever group you're part of. So you see that this has to be taken into account, and therefore one should accept certain leniencies in order to avoid such hatred. And another application of this is that we accept testimony from Am Haaretz, even though they're careless regarding certain halachot, and we're not sure if they're totally trustworthy. And in order to be a kosher witness, you have to be completely, shomer mitzvot. And maybe Am Haaretz is lax and doesn't know or is not careful about things. But nevertheless, if we would say we're not going to accept any testimony for any Am Haaretz, right? Even if Am Haaretz, he saw a murder happen, so we don't accept your testimony, right? Or whatever other case. So then this would cause a huge split and a lot of hatred. And so therefore we rely on the Rabbi Yosei also, right? Of course, if we know the person's a gambler, we're not going to accept them. But if he's generally a okay person, then we accept their testimony in order to avoid hatred. All right, good. So now we understand why there's a difference between Terumah and Kodesh, because Terumah we are lenient on because we don't accept food of Terumah food from an Am Haaretz. But now we bring up a new question. We should be concerned about borrowing vessels because we're about to prove that we do allow Haberim to borrow utensils like a metal pot or glass, things that can be koshered, and the Chaver can borrow those things for Terumah and use them. And so how come we don't worry about that and say, oh, since we borrow pots and pans from a Am Haaretz, therefore we should make sure that the Am Haaretz is going to dip them correctly. And since he has to dip them correctly, he doesn't know the laws, we should prohibit them from dipping one inside the other, because then they may come to do it in the wrong way. And since we borrow, even though we don't use their food, we do borrow their pots, so we should make a blanket law for them because they don't know and they'll come to make a mistake. So how come we don't do that? Okay, so first let's prove that in fact this is the law, that we allow Chaverim to borrow pots and pans from Am Haaretz. Titnan, a long Mishnah Eduyot, that says, Keli cheres masil al hakol divrei Bet Hillel. Okay, so now a new concept. Kli cheres, earthenware vessel, cannot be koshered, right? If it cannot be purified. If it becomes tameh, just got to break it. Putting an earthenware vessel in a mikveh doesn't help. Thankfully, earthenware vessels are pretty cheap, so you can always get a new one. Okay, but there is also a benefit from earthenware vessels, which is that if there's corpse impurity, there's a corpse in a room, so that everything in the room becomes tameh, unless it was inside a kli cheres. If you have a kli cheres with food inside or other vessels inside, and it's sealed up, this earthenware vessel, then that protects anything inside from the tumah outside. And so that's what Bet Hillel says. Kli cheres saves everything inside and makes it tahor. This applies to another case that's just in a bigger version, which is if there's a corpse on the first floor of a building, and then and there's a hole between the first floor and the second floor. So in that case, the tumah would go up through the hole or a skylight. But if you plug up the hole with earthenware vessel, and that earthenware vessel itself is tahor, then the tumah does not go through. If the earthenware vessel itself is tameh, then the tumah will go through and affect the things on the second floor. Good. Bet Shammai omerim eno masil ela ala ochalim vala mashkim ve'al keleh hacheres. Bet Shammai says no. It only protects, the earthenware vessel will only protect food and drink in it and earthenware vessels that are inside. But if there's metal, wood, cloth, anything else inside that earthenware vessel, then it does not protect. He's worried that in the house of an Am Haaretz, the earthenware vessel itself, right, or the one that's plugging up the hole, is itself tameh, and if it itself is tameh, then tumah will go inside and make the stuff inside tameh. So, but Bet Shammai has this interesting theory: the earthenware vessel will protect food and drink, but not metal and wood. So we don't understand what's this about. Luckily, the Mishnah continues and has a dialogue between the two houses. Amru lahem Bet Hillel Bet Shammai mipnei ma. Bet Hillel, why are you making such a distinction? Right? Bet Hillel is lenient. He says anything in the earthenware vessel we can assume is okay. Why are you making a distinction and say food and drink is okay, but not other things? Amru Bet Shammai mipnei shu tameh al gabe Am Haaretz ve'en keli tameh hotzetz. He says because the outside earthenware vessel is owned by an Am Haaretz, and since it's owned by Am Haaretz, we have to assume he's not careful, and it's going to be tameh. When an earthenware vessel is tameh, it does not act as a block to shield the things inside. That's why I say the things inside are no good if they're metal and cloth. All right. Amru lahem Bet Hillel v'halo tiartem ochalin mashkim shebetocho. Bet Hillel says, yep, in that case, fine. Make everything inside tameh. Why did you say that the food and drink is tahor? Amru lahem Bet Shammai keshetiharnu ochalin mashkin shebetocho le'atzmo tiharnu. When I said that the food and drink is inside is okay, that's only for him, for the Am Haaretz. Right? He follows his own system. He's consistent. And, he would think that he thinks that the earthenware jug is tahor. So he thinks that the things inside are tahor. So for him, he can eat what's inside, right? That's sufficient for the level of an Am Haaretz. But for a chaver, I wouldn't eat that. Okay. אבל נתת הכלי שטהרתו לך ולא, and Bet Shammai continues, but according to you, Bet Hillel, and if you look at the Mishnah in Eduyot, it has added words that says, according to you, Bet Hillel, you're going, would you say that we should permit and purify the vessel for inside, both for me and for the Am Haaretz, right? Would you say that everything inside is okay? You can't trust it. You don't trust the Am Haaretz for the earthenware vessel outside, so therefore you should not trust him for what is inside either. Okay, and so that's the controversy, and so the point here is that how come Bet Shammai says that the pots and pans inside are tameh, because he's saying those are tameh because we borrow them. So the food that's inside we're not going to ever have from the Am Haaretz anyway. So we could say, "Oh, you can eat the food," but the metal and glass, the cloth that are inside that people do borrow, there, Bet Shammai has to say, oh, those are tameh for everyone because we don't want a chaver to borrow them. And there you go. You see that chaverim do borrow them. Okay, wait, more on this conversation. Tanya, we have a beraita. אמר רבי יהושע, בושני מדבריכם, בית שמאי, אפשר אישה לאשה בערבה, אישה בערבה, אישה בערבה טמאין שבעה ובעסק טהור. This beraita is another comment on the original machloket between Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai. Perhaps this Rabbi Yehoshua and this beraita did not have the conversation that we just quoted, which is in the Mishnah. It may have only had the very beginning of what their stance is. So this is a similar explanation of what we just said. So Rabbi Yehoshua is questioning Bet Shammai, and he says, I'm embarrassed from your words, Bet Shammai. Bet Shammai, your words make no sense. I'm embarrassed that you said them. So this is a very antagonistic thing to say about Bet Shammai. And so what's Rabbi Yehoshua's problem? He says, can you imagine the following case where a woman is kneading dough in a bowl, let's say a metal bowl, and on the second floor, and then there's a corpse on the first floor, right? And it goes through an earthenware vessel that is tameh from an Am Haaretz. And so in such a case, would you say that the woman and the metal bowl, those two are timein, right? Because Bet Shammai says anything that can be purified and a person can go in the mikveh, and so to a metal bowl can go into mikveh, right? And so other vessels are tameh, but he said food is tahor. So therefore the dough that she's kneading in that metal vessel with her hands is tahor, and yet she and the bowl are tameh. That makes no sense. Lugin male mashkin, if you had a metal jug that was full of liquid, lugin tameh. Tumat shib'ah, mashkin tehorin. So would you say there that the metal vessel is tameh for 7 days, depending on what kind of impurity it was? It's a corpse impurity, right? That's what would be tameh for 7 days, and the liquid would be tahor, right? Bet Hillel, you make no sense in your original stance there. Why would you say that food and drink is protected by the earthenware of an Am Haaretz, but not other vessels? So that's Rabbi Yehoshua. He cannot figure it out, and he's ashamed of it. And then one of the students of Bet Shammai explained it to him. He came to him and said, Amar lo, Omar lecha taman shel Bet Shammai. I'll explain it to you if you listen. Amar lo, emor. Okay, fine. Let me hear it. Amar lo, keli tameh chotzetz or no chotzetz. I have a question. If a vessel is tameh, earthenware vessel, does it serve as a barrier or not? Does not serve as a barrier against corpse impurity? Amar le, no chotzetz. So of course it does not, right? Because it's tameh itself. So then the corpse impurity goes right into it or right through it from floor to floor. Further question: earthenware vessel of an Am Haaretz, is it tameh, considered tameh or tahor? I mean, of course, if we know it's tameh, right? If we saw someone touch it, but if we don't know, the status quo, because it belongs to Am Haaretz, we have to assume that he's not careful. So Amar lo tameh. V'im ata omer lo tameh, kilu mashkiach alecha. ולא אלא שאם אתה אומר לא טמא, אומר לך שלי טהור ושלך טמא. And so now the student says to student of Bet Shammai says to Rabbi Yehoshua, It says, and if you would go and tell the Am Haaretz, listen, this is tameh because we don't. Everything that you touch is tameh, and this earthenware vessel is tameh, and everything the corpse impurity went through. Would he listen to you? And he says, no, he wouldn't listen. He wouldn't listen to me. Not only would the Am Haaretz not listen to you and say, oh, it's tameh, I'll be careful. He would say the opposite. No, mine is tahor and you're tameh. The Am Haaretz were brazen in attacking the Haberim. And so you see that, therefore, this law that now you understand what Bet Shammai was talking about. When he said that food and drink inside the earthenware vessel are tahor, he meant they're tahor for the Am Haaretz, because he's not going to listen to you anyway if you say it's tameh. So for him, within his level, that is the same, just as tahor as anything else he thinks is tahor. Whereas the metal and glass, and we don't care to say it's tahor because we're not going to ever borrow it from him. But regarding the metal and glass, there, Bet Shammai says tameh, because those are things that we do borrow, and therefore we have to declare them tameh so that we won't come to use them when they are tameh. When Rabbi Yoshua heard that, he agreed and realized he was mistaken for denigrating Bet Shammai. Miyad halach Rabbi Yoshua v'nishtatech al kibdei Bet Shammai. Amar na'aneti lachem asmot Bet Shammai u'mas situmot shelachem kach meforashot halacha chama v'chama amru kol yamav hushcheru shinav mipenet ha'aniyotav. So Rabbi Yoshua went and bowed on the grave of Bet Shammai, and he says, I have to humble myself before you, the bones of Bet Shammai. If when there's something in your rulings that's unexplained and you see how deep it is, all the more so when you actually do explain yourself, and that we have to be so careful to, even if we don't follow it, because halakha is like Bet Hillel, to respect it and learn from the depths of your words. And he would be Yoshua, because that one time he said something negative about Shammai, he fasted many fasts until his teeth darkened because of that. In the Mishnah, actually says Bet Hillel changed his mind. He says, oh, Bet Shammai, you're right. We have to worry about such a thing because, yes, we do borrow vessels. Okay, Katani Mihat, we brought this whole conversation for this point. Lecha velo al mashalinan minayhu. So we see that we do borrow vessels from Am Haaretz, and therefore we're asking now, how come the Mishnah allows people to immerse a vessel inside a vessel for Terumah? Aren't we worried that then the Am Haaretz will do the same thing? He'll do it in a mistaken way, and the Chaver will come and borrow one of those vessels and just use it as is, and will come to error and cause Tum'ah to Terumah. That's the question, and the answer is you're right, we do borrow it, but when we borrow it, we immerse them first. We don't trust the Am Haaretz, right? And so therefore, we can allow we can immerse things one inside the other for Terumah, and even if the Am Haaretz will copy us, that's his problem. And if we borrow his vessel, we're going to dip the vessel. It takes one second to do it, and so therefore, we're not worried about inserting one inside the other and dipping the whole thing together. Oh, good. Wait, if that's the case that you're dipping them anyway, so then Bet Hillel could tell Bet Shammai, wait a second, why are you saying that the kelim are tameh? And because we're going to borrow them? Yeah, but when we borrow them, we purify them anyway. So you may as well treat them the same as the food and drink that we say, for you, it's tahor, so you can use it, and therefore say the same thing. And Bet Hillel could uphold their opinion that we say, it's all tahor for the Am Haaretz, because we're not going to take their food. And if we borrow their vessels, we're going to dip it in any case. Okay, and the answer to that is, the answer is because we're not only worried about a lola regular tum'ah that you could just dip it and then it's okay. We are also worried about that and this is in fact the case that we're talking about, that it has corpse tum'ah. Now, if it became tameh because there was a corpse in the room, then that will become tameh and requires a 7-day process, right? You have to wait 3 days, sprinkle it with parah adumah water on the 3rd day, on the 7th day, and dip it. After that, now usually when you borrow a vessel, you don't borrow for so long. You're just making a casserole. Can I borrow your casserole dish? I'm making it today. I'm going to return it tomorrow. People don't borrow for such a long period of time, for 7 days, and so that's why we have to say, Bet Shammai has to say, vessels are impure because people don't borrow for that long. Okay. Now, so and all right, and the Am Haaretz, we're not going to believe him if he says, "Oh, I dipped it." We don't believe him because maybe he didn't do it at all. Maybe he did it the wrong way. So that's what we're assuming. But now we're going to question that. Is it true that we don't trust Am Haaretz to say that they koshered something, that they put it in the mikveh? We have a baraita that says, if Am Haaretz comes and says, this did become tameh, but I put it in the mikveh, and now it's okay, and now it's tahor, we believe them, right? We don't, we believe them in things that they know about, and you can trust them on this. So if you can trust them on this, then you should be allowed to then you should be allowed to borrow theirs even for just 1 day. And so because they're not going to be tameh, maybe you can't trust them regarding other types of tumah, but you can trust them regarding tumat met. Abaye says, no, there's no contradiction. When this baraita says you can trust them regarding dipping something in that was tameh, that's regarding himself, his own body. If it says, I was in contact with the corpse, but don't worry, I did the process and I immersed myself, we can believe him. But when it comes to his vessels, that's what the baraita was talking about. When it comes to his vessels, then we do not believe him. That people aren't as careful about their vessels than they are about their own bodies, and that's what we were talking about earlier. That was talking about vessels. We do not trust them. That's Abaye's answer. Maybe both are in fact talking about vessels. If he says, I never put one vessel inside another and immerse them together. If he says that, we can believe him. And that's what the baraita is talking about. But if he says, I did immerse one inside another, but I was always careful not to put something inside a vessel with a small opening. If he says that, then we do not trust him, because Am Haaretz isn't going to know what is the small opening. Did he really have it in mind every time? And so he's not going to be able to distinguish. In that case, we cannot trust him. It would be like, if someone opened the code for a computer, the file, and and now it's not working, so we blame him. So, and let's say he's not a programmer. So if he says, oh, I opened the file, but I didn't change anything that will make a difference, right? I only added comments. So then we don't trust him because he doesn't know what changes or not. If he says, I didn't open the file at all, then we can trust him because that he knows what that means, right? So too here. Am Haaretz, that would explain that baraita. Okay, Vahatanya, another problem. This is actually a support. Vahatanya, Ne'eman Am Haaretz lomar perot lo huchsheru, aval eno ne'eman lomar perot huchsheru, aval lo nitmeu. If you have fruit, right? Fruit is only susceptible to tumah once it becomes wet and you want the water to be there. So if the Am Haaretz says this fruit never became wet, it never became susceptible to tumah, you can believe him. But if he says they did become susceptible to tumah, but they never actually touched tumah, so they became wet, but they never touched tumah, in that case, we don't believe him. So we believe him for a bigger thing where they understand and they know those things and are careful. But if they admit to part of the way that it was susceptible, then we don't believe him about the details because those are much more complicated. Okay, now back to Abaye, who said that we believe Am Haaretz if he says, I went to the mikveh, I was tameh, but I went to the mikveh and I'm okay. Is that true? Am Haaretz שבא לעשות אין מזין עליו עד שיעשה בפנינו שלישי ושביעי. A chaver that comes and says, listen, I had a corpse impurity but now I'm ready to begin the process, and it's already been 3 days, so I'm ready for the haza'ah, for the sprinkling. So we do it right away. If Am Haaretz comes and he says, "I'm ready for the sprinkling," we do not. We don't know. Maybe he just had touched the corpse yesterday and didn't wait the sufficient 3 days before he can have the first one. So we say, "Hold on, you got to wait." And we watch him for 3 days, make sure that come back in 3 days and don't have any contact with the corpse in between, and then we'll start. We don't believe him that he started. So you see, in this case, we do not believe Am Haaretz that he says he went through the whole purification process. We don't believe him to begin to start it, certainly not to say I finished it. Very, very interesting principle. And it says, because we were stringent about him at the beginning of the process, therefore we can be lenient to regarding him at the end of the process. That's because we did a serious check on him at the beginning when he first comes and says, "I was tameh, I want to start my process." So then we say, "Oh, no, we're not going to let you do it right away. We have to wait 3 days, and then we're going to come back in 7 days." In that case, so we're stringent in the beginning. Because we're so stringent in the beginning, so we checked him out. We're careful. Therefore, if he comes at the end and says, "Oh, I went to the mikveh," we believe him, right? Because he's not going to go through all the trouble to be checked out in the beginning and then not follow up and be responsible at the end, right? It's like, if you get TSA pre-check, you go through the trouble at the beginning and they check you out a lot, right? And you have to go and spend an hour doing that. Well, if you're stringent at the beginning on the guy and check them out, then you can be lenient when he actually comes to the airport later, because you know that he already went through a process. All right, and that's all for that discussion. And now a short section left about the second case of the Mishnah, which was regarding inside and outside. We said, so what does this mean? My achoraim vetoch. Regarding terumah, we saw that if a liquid touches, impure liquid touches the outside, only the outside will be tameh and not the inside of it. Whereas if it touches the inside, the whole thing will be tameh. That's true for terumah. For kodashim, if impure liquid touches the outside, then the whole thing is tameh, even the inside. Also, if it touches just the handle, then the rest of it does not. For terumah, we separate the different parts of the utensil, assuming that each part can be used in some way on its own. They are considered separate for terumah, but all together for Kodesh. Kiditnan. So here now we'll explain it in Masechet Kelim. Kelishin ma achorav b'mashkin achorav temein tocho ogno ozno v'yadav tehorin. If you have a regular vessel that its outside became tameh with tumat mashkin, this is the Rabbanan, because generally mashkin cannot make a vessel tameh. So since all the Rabbanan, that's why there's these distinctions between one type and another. So then if the outside, then the outside is tameh, but the inside and the handles and the ear-shaped handles and the rim, all these are tahor because they're separate parts. But if the impure water goes inside, then the whole thing will be tahor, will be tameh. Okay, and that applies to terumah, but for kodashim we are stringent. Now, beta sevita, the place for gripping. What is this place for gripping? What does it mean? My beta sevita, we have three opinions. Amar Rav Yehuda Mashimuel, makom shesovto, the place that you hold it when you want to pick it up. וכן הוא אומר, ויספוט לה כלי. רבי עשה אמר רבי יוחנן, מקום שנקיי הדעת סובעין. This is the place where those who, two opinions. Right, place where he grips it, or to pass, not only to hold it, but also to pass. That's the first opinion, because right, this is from Ruth when they give her some corn. So this is a place that you'd hold it, pick it up, and pass it. So that's one understanding. And the second one is where those who are nikiyadat, people who are germies, and they don't like to mix up their different foods together. So this is a place that they use for dipping. In other words, this is a vessel, something like this, that you have a main part of the vessel and you have a side part where you can put some condiments, right? So, whereas regular people, they maybe put ketchup on all their French fries and eat it. But people who are very clean, they don't like to do that. You have French fries on your finger, ketchup on your fingers. They like to have a separate thing, right? They don't want to use separate. They don't want to put ketchup on their plate or on their cup that they're going to use also for other things. They want to have a separate area. So that's what we're talking about. They would have these fancy types of bowls that had an area for condiments and a separate area. So you see that is considered its own item for this purpose of terumah, that if something, water fell just on the outside, so that's considered a separate area. And it remains tahor. For kodashim, if the water touches any part of it, the whole thing is in fact tameh. Tane Rabbi kamed Rab Nachman. Kol hakelim en lahem achorayim vetoch. Echad kodshei hamikdash, ve'echad kodshei hagibul. Rabbi said this following brayta from Rab Nachman, that regarding all vessels, they do not have a law of a separation of outside and inside, whether it is kodshei mikdash, we'll see what that means, or Kodashim that you eat outside of the Mikdash, outside of Jerusalem. But they're both Kodashim. So in other words, we do separate inside and outside for Terumah, but not for Kodashim. Amaleh, Kodshei Gevul Maini. What do you mean by that term? Terumah, so Kodshei Gevul is Terumah. Terumah has a level of holiness, and it's eaten outside. You can eat Terumah anywhere as long as it's tahor. Hold on. So that according to that interpretation, for terumah, there's no distinction between outside and inside, and touching the outside will cause the inside to become tameh. But our Mishnah has taught that regarding this law, it's okay for terumah, and if the water touches outside, the inside is not to become tameh. So, new definition. Instead, what we mean is that Kodshei Mikdash is regular sacrifices that are brought in the Bet Mikdash and have to be eaten there in Jerusalem. Whereas Kodshei Gevul means someone who takes upon himself that stringency to eat everything, even cholin, as if it were Kodesh, and keep the purity laws to that level. That's what we're talking about. So one or the other, even if you're in cholin, but you're the type of person that eats it as if it was pure for sacrificial food, then if it's water touches the outside, then it'll make the whole thing tameh. And this, in fact, is proven. Ad kartan militad amad bar avu. Now we can remind ourselves of something that we did in fact see a couple of dapim ago. It says achad asre ma'alot shanu kan, that there are 11 different laws in stringencies mentioned in the Mishnah. Shesh ishonot ben hakodesh ben hacholin shenasu atarat hakodesh, achronot lakodesh abalo lacholin shenasu atarat hakodesh. The first 6 apply both to someone eating actual sacrificial meat and to someone who takes upon himself to eat regular food, as if it's taharat hakodesh. And this, in fact, is one of the 6, the first 6. That's the second one. And so you see that it would make sense that this matches up, that this is, since it's in the first 6, yes, in fact, if someone is eating cholin al tarat hakodesh, they would have to be stringent regarding the outside and the inside, and that's exactly what this baraita means when it says kodshei mikdash and kodshei gevul. Whereas the last 5 apply only to actual kodesh, but not cholin shenasu al tarat hakodesh. This one is the second. This one is the second in the first category, and therefore, yes, that stringency does apply. Baruch Adonai Olam. Amen ve'amen.